Chapter 13, 88. Wheels of History. Sunny continued to think about the history of the dream realm. Age of Chaos was the first, ending with the imprisonment of the void and the creation of the world. It was followed by an age that could be called the Age of Gods, a prehistoric time when the gods and those living things they created, as well as the demons who came out of nowhere, battled the remnant abyssal creatures across the newborn world. Then came the Age of Heroes. It started when the nascent humanity started to spread and fight against the corrupted creatures inhabiting the world for dominion over it. It ended when the abominations were pushed back and largely exterminated, turning from an ever-present danger into dire, but rare foes. What followed was a different age, an age when humanity ruled the world unopposed. Noctis had not known its name, perhaps because people living in that time needed none. For them, it was simply now, a golden age of peace and prosperity. Relatively speaking, of course. I am sure there was plenty of bloodshed and conflict even after most of the corrupted had already been slain or driven into the wilderness. Humans are humans. After all, there were other tribes of creatures inhabiting the world as well. I doubt that everyone lived together in absolute harmony. Due to their immortality, Noctis and the other chain lords, powerful transcendents born in the Age of Heroes, lived long enough to witness the new age as well. In fact, they might have had more to do with the change of epochs than anyone knew. Noctis considered the destruction of the Kingdom of Hope to be the turning point in history, one that signified the end of the Age of Heroes, which meant that the Golden Age was poisoned from the very start. It began with the imprisonment of Hope and ended when she broke free from her chains. During that time, the gods grew distant and indifferent. Their followers even started to fight among themselves. Slowly, prosperity waned, turning into stagnation and decay. Both the first and second of Sunny's nightmares took place at the dusk of the Golden Age, not long before the demons rose in rebellion against the gods. That war, the last war, destroyed the civilization of the dream realm. Although it was like a flash in the scope of history, perhaps its brief terror was worthy of being considered to be an age of its own. The Age of Demons, a terrible age of dread and destruction. Although that age was the latest, it was also the most mysterious. Everything the humans of the waking world had found in the dream realm were marks left by the great war between the demons and the gods, and yet almost nothing was known about it. Why did it start? How did it end? How did the gods die? What happened to their enemies, the demons? All that Sunny knew was that at some point between the start of the Doom War and the present day, the seeds of nightmares appeared, and the corruption reclaimed the world it had been almost banished from once. It was the end of the dream realm. Come to think of it, I'm wrong. The history of the dream realm had never really ended. There were human settlements on its perilous reaches today, after all, great citadels like Bastion and Ravenheart, and many smaller ones, where hundreds of thousands of awakened lived, fought, and survived, slowly claiming more and more land from the nightmare creatures. Almost like a new age of heroes. Or rather, the age of the nightmare spell. Sunny dodged a drop of water that fell from the ceiling of the narrow corridor and tilted his head a little. Viewed from this perspective, it almost seemed as if the purpose of the nightmare spell was to repopulate the dream realm, which had been turned to lifeless hell by the Doom War, and breathe new life into it. To push the wheels of history that had stopped spinning a long time ago and make them revolve again, carrying the once desolate world into the future. It's almost like Weaver is some kind of a noble hero. Of course, that change had come at the expense of countless deaths and immeasurable misery among the inhabitants of the waking world. And Sunny did not really buy that the demon of fate had been any kind of hero, let alone a noble one. Still, the implication seemed too sensible to be discarded completely. The Age of Chaos, the Age of Gods, the Age of Heroes, The Golden Age, the Age of Demons, and the Age of the Nightmare Spell. If seen in such a framework, the history could make Sonny a huge amount of contribution points. Just imagining it made his eyes gleam. If I manage to write up this theory well and publish it, accurate or not, my oh my, I'll be swimming in academic achievements. Let alone a guest lecturer, I'll be made an honorary professor, a dean even. As he grinned greedily, Cassie slowed her steps a little and raised her hand. We're close. Be cautious. If there are really records left, we should be careful not to damage them any further. Although the corridors they had walked through were largely flooded, this section of the lost temple seemed strangely dry. Perhaps the structure here was much more durable, and had thus resisted the passage of time better. Perhaps there were still some enchantments protecting the inner sanctum. In any case, the floor they walked on gradually became drier. Soon the three masters passed a chamber filled to the brim with shelves. There had been countless books on them once, but now the shelves lay broken, the ancient scrolls long destroyed by water. Sonny checked a few, only to shake his head in disappointment. Even those that seemed relatively better preserved were utterly illegible. They moved further, passing several similar chambers. The library of the temple had indeed been vast once, but now all the knowledge accumulated by the Sibyls and their faithful priests was lost. Some of it was destroyed by moisture, some seemed to have been burned, while some had been obliterated by the defiled Sibyl in her rage. Such a shame. Finally, they reached a tall door. Just like all the other doors in the inner sanctum, it had long been turned to rotten splinters. However, the chamber behind it, the largest one they've seen in the last few minutes, looked strangely untouched. Much more importantly, there were no broken shelves and rotten scrolls within it. Instead, there were stone slates. After entering the central chamber of the ancient library, Sonny felt his excitement diminish somewhat. The stone slates had seemed unharmed from the outside, but at a closer look, they were not in the best state. The defiled Sibyl had rampaged in this chamber as well. Many slates were shattered, some turned to rubble, others to dust. The whole place was a mess, with deep cracks littering its walls and the ceiling. There were deep puddles on the floor, and the cold darkness shrouding the chamber echoed with the sound of falling water. Still, there were many slates that were unharmed, as well. Cassie remained motionless for a few moments, then sighed and sat down on a relatively dry pile of rubble. Sonny gave her a stare. "What, you're not going to help us look?" The blind girl smiled. "I am looking." He coughed and awkwardly turned away. "Yeah, way to go, genius, asking a blind person if she'll look." Although Cassie's awakened ability allowed her to navigate the world, it did not grant her sight. Cassie sensed the future as if she lived it, meaning that she remained blind. It was her ascended ability that allowed her to see, even if it was only through someone else's eyes. Someone like Sonny or Nephi's, for example, which meant that she could only look at the slates that they were looking at. So she could only help them identify the correct one, not find it herself. Hiding his embarrassment, Sonny cleared his throat. "So, what exactly should we search for?" Cassie lingered for a moment. "We should probably separate all the intact slates first. Even those that do not contain the information we're currently looking for might be useful later." Indeed, rescuing Effie and Jet was not going to be their last stop on the Great River. They would have to travel to Twilight as well, and then journey all the way to the dawn of time to attack Verge. There was no telling what kind of dangers hid beneath the surface of the endless river. Even though the information recorded by the Sibyls was outdated by now, it was still immensely valuable. Cassie tilted her head a little. "Other than that, keep an eye out for any mention of flowers." Sonny nodded. There was not much known about the place where Effie and Jet were trapped, but the inhabitants of Fallen Grace referred to it as the Wind Flower. The vague stories they had heard about that area of the Great River told very little, except for how no one ever returned from there. It wasn't even known where the name Windflower had come from. With a sigh, Sunny nodded and went about sifting through the rubble without wasting much time. Soon, he and Nephi's were crawling through the debris, separating those slates that were only lightly damaged from those that were completely destroyed. As they did, Sunny briefly looked at each one. Although Anik had taught them how to navigate the great river, at least enough for them to make their way to Fallen Grace, he couldn't really read the maps engraved into the slates. The maps Sunny was used to were based on topography and landmarks like mountains, rivers, and craters. What was there to put on a map of an endless, vast river? The system the Sybils had used was rather elaborate. It was based on a convoluted method of assigning each slate a kind of coordinates that had to do with its relation to the edges of the great river, the passage of the suns, and the approximate distance to the few stationary hazards plaguing the tomb of Ariel. None of the slates depicted the full map of the great river, either. Instead, they were supposed to be put together and moved around as the areas described on them shifted their locations, with old coordinates being stricken from the slate and new ones added. Since most of the slates had been destroyed, there was no hope of recreating the full map. However, one great thing that the Sybils and their servants had done was including a description of what was depicted on the slates, engraved on the back. So, instead of trying to decipher the markings describing the coordinates, Sunny read these descriptions instead. His face slowly grew gloomy. A giant maw that opens underwater and swallows entire island ships, a region where the wind literally cuts flesh. What the hell? An illusory island that can only be seen by the dying. So what if he suddenly saw that island? It would mean that he was going to die in the next few minutes. Or was it the other way around, and it was seeing the island that killed people? In any way, it was very much way too creepy. Sunny knew that the tomb of Ariel was a dreadful place, but now, he suddenly felt lucky to have made it to Fallen Grace in one piece. Well, they had encountered the time storm, which was pretty terrifying even as far as the local perils were concerned. So, calling himself lucky might have not been quite correct. Whatever. After a while, the two of them settled into a rhythm. Sunny was looking for those slates that were in one piece, while Nephi's collected those that had been broken into pieces, but could be restored, and put them back together with the help of the Dark Shaper. Cassie, meanwhile, rested on the pile of rubble for a while, then got bored and stood up to take a walk around the chamber. She hovered near them for a bit, then put her hand on the wall and slowly traced the perimeter of the chamber with her fingers. Since there was rubble everywhere, it took her a long time to complete the circle and get back to the entrance. Actually, hadn't she been gone for too long? Suddenly worried, Sunny pulled his attention away from the slates and concentrated on his shadow sense. It only took him a split second. To his relief, he could still clearly feel Cassie's shadow. Turning around, he looked at the far end of the chamber and saw her delicate figure there, standing in front of the cracked wall. She seemed deep in thought. Frowning slightly, Sunny called out to her. "Hey, is that wall very interesting? Come here and keep us company." Perhaps it was foolish, considering that Cassie could sense the future. But Sunny was not absolutely sure that the flooded temple was safe now, and having the blind girl outside his immediate reach made him feel uncomfortable. What would happen if they were suddenly attacked? Hearing his voice, Cassie hesitated for a few moments, then turned to face them and pointed to the wall. "Actually, it is interesting." She paused for a moment, and then added with uncertainty. "A slight wind is coming from the cracks. I think there is another room behind that wall." Standing up, Sunny stretched and walked over to where Cassie was standing. Extending his shadow sense through the cracked wall, he remained silent for a few moments, then smiled. "Good catch. There is indeed a hidden space there." To think that he had almost missed it. The blind girl stared at him for a bit, which gave Sunny a hint to look around. Damn, it's still creepy to know that she's riding my senses. Can't she ask at least? That ability of hers is not limited to sight, so, I don't even want to think what kinds of things she can sense me sensing. Suddenly feeling hot, Sunny glanced at Cassie and asked in a stifled tone, "What are you looking for?" The blind girl lingered. If there's a secret space, there has to be a mechanism to unlock it. Some kind of lever, perhaps. Oh, and give me some credit, all right. I am polite enough to know when not to use my ability. He suppressed an impulse to jump back. What, you can read thoughts now too? Cassie took a deep breath, then patiently shook her head. No, it was just written all over your face. Sunny let out a sigh of relief, then trembled. Wait, she's looking through my eyes, so how can she see my face? At that moment, Neffs patted him on the shoulder. Because she looked through mine. Honestly, Sunny, for someone who claims to have never used his shadow to do perverted things at the academy dormitory, you sure think of weird stuff often. He stared at her in disbelief. What do you mean, claims to? I absolutely did not, you know I can't lie. Nephi's looked at Cassie, with a hint of a smile on her lips. Notice that he said did not, instead of have not. Sunny remained silent, his mouth open. Oh, I see what's going on. Scoffing, he turned away. Yeah, and until I say will not, you better behave. Who knows what weird stuff I'll think of. There were a few moments of silence, and then Nephi said a bit awkwardly from behind him. So, whatever mechanism there was to unlock the door, it has to have broken a long time ago. He grinned and watched as she stepped forward and delivered a swift punch to the cracked wall. The ancient stone shattered and collapsed, revealing a dark space beyond. Sunny shielded his face from the cloud of stone dust and peered inside. Hidden behind a false wall was a small circular chamber. There was an altar in its center with something laying on it. As Nephi's raised her torch, its light reflected from a polished metal surface. He suddenly felt the shadows shift slightly and widened his eyes in disbelief. That glow! There was a staff of pristine white wood laying on the altar, untouched by dust or dirt. Both its ends were encased in a beautiful weave of bands of polished gold, with a single radiant gem, a crystal, crowning the top. The rough crystal was easy to identify as a soul shard of a rather high rank, supreme, perhaps, or even higher. What made Sunny instinctively hold his breath, however, was something else. The white staff was emanating an ethereal golden glow, the kind that Sunny could only see because his eyes had been altered by Weaver's lineage. The familiar and unmistakable shine that the things having to do with divinity possessed. As he was looking at the beautiful staff, stunned, Cassie approached the altar and lowered her head. Her expression was more perplexed than shocked. She remained silent for a few moments, then said quietly, "How curious, I did not know that it was here." Both Sunny and Nephi's looked at her with surprise. Throwing another glance at the staff, he asked, "You know what this thing is?" The blind girl lingered for a bit, then nodded. "Yes, I think I do. It fits the description of one of the holy relics that the Sibyls brought into the tomb of Ariel from the outside world. Supposedly, it was a gift from one of the gods, bestowed to a priestess of their temple in the distant past." Sunny's eyes widened. "Wait, are you telling me that this thing is a divine artifact?" His heart was beating wildly. Cassie smiled. "Yes, in a sense, meaning that it is rumored to have been created by a god. However, it is not a divine rank artifact, if that is what you're asking. Although it does have some mystical qualities, its power is actually not that great." She remained silent for a bit, and then added, "Actually, that can be said about most divine relics, and therefore about most divine memories created in their image, not that there's many of those around. We humans perceive memories as something that grants us power, but for the gods and the lesser deities, They themselves were the power. So, any relic they created would have been a mere tool of convenience, not something meant to empower them. Sonny thought about his own two divine memories. That description fit them perfectly. Both Weaver's mask and the shadow lantern allowed him to do astonishing things. And yet, there were indeed memories in his arsenal that empowered him much more. There was no doubt that his divine memories were infinitely more powerful, and yet they did not make him much more powerful. He had considered this paradoxical situation plenty of times, and the conclusions he made were similar to what Cassie said. The gods did not need external sources of power, and so the tools they left behind served specific purposes, astonishing and wondrous, but not necessarily helpful to a human. The blind girl, meanwhile, gently caressed the white wood of the beautiful staff and added, "In any case, this relic is called guiding light. It's not even a tool made to be used by a god, just something gifted to a mortal out of affection. The powers it possesses are not that stunning. It had served the Sibyls well before they came to the tomb of Ariel, but after that, this staff mostly held symbolic meaning." Sonny stared at the beautiful golden glow for a while, then asked in a dubious tone, "Not that stunning, so what does it do?" Cassie thought for a bit, then hesitantly shrugged. "It's supposed to guide people. Actually, I don't know that well." She picked up the staff and held it carefully. After a few moments, the soft radiance of the soul shard crowning the relic swirled, growing more intense on one side. Sonny blinked. "What did you do?" The blind girl suddenly seemed a little embarrassed. I just, sort of, thought in my head, Miss Guiding Light, can you guide me to Windflower, please?" He stared at her incredulously. "Let's skip the first part for now. So, this divine relic is basically a pretty flashlight with a very basic navigation function." Cassie coughed. "I guess so." Sonny sighed, then shook his head and covered his face with a palm. And here I was all excited. Well, it could have been worse. The previous divine relic he had found in the wild was a wooden knife that could only kill one specific person, while simultaneously being responsible for turning that person into an immortal powerhouse. Although the guiding light was not exactly an artifact worthy of being called divine, it was at least more useful than that. Actually, being able to know the general direction of almost anything you thought about was quite an amazing boon if used with foresight. Not to mention that it would help them find the members of the cohort sooner, which was why they had come to this temple in the first place. Sonny stared at the wooden staff for a few moments, then shook his head again. "Well, great. Let's use this thing well. For now, though, we still have to find the information about Windflower." They had already known where that place was located. What they had really come here to find was the information about what kind of dangers were waiting for them there. Turning away, Sonny let out a disappointed sigh. "Damn it." As he walked back to the slates, he tried not to look too disheartened. This had to be the most anticlimactic discovery of a divine relic ever. Sonny had wanted to get back to the slates, but as he left the secret room, he suddenly felt uneasy. Something about the chamber had changed. He couldn't quite put a finger on it, but it was as if the shadows populating it were moving. "Hold on to something." Hearing Cassie's voice, he put his hand on a stone pillar. In the next moment, the floor beneath him violently shook. Its already pronounced tilt was suddenly even steeper, causing countless small pieces of rubble to roll in their direction. The sound of falling water had grown louder. "Curses!" Looking at his companions, Sonny sighed and said in a glum tone, "I guess the battle did too much damage to the temple, after all." Nephi's nodded somberly. "Should we hurry?" He hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. A swarm of sparks rose into the air, slowly forming into a familiar alloy chest. "We probably don't have much time before this entire place sinks. Let's just load everything into the covetous coffer. We can continue studying the slates when we're safely back on the chain breaker. Of course, safety was a relative term here in the tomb of Ariel. Sonny had only grown more wary of the great river after reading the records in this ancient chamber, but still, he was not enthused at the idea of having to escape the temple while it was actively drowning. Feeling like they had very little time left, the three masters abandoned all attempts of categorizing the slates and simply threw everything remotely intact into the welcoming maw of the covetous coffer. The temple shook once more while they were at it, causing Sonny to curse in frustration. Finally, they were done. Not wasting any time, Sonny led the way out of the central chamber, past the rooms full of rotting scrolls, and into the cold darkness of the narrow corridors leading to the great hall. By then, it felt like they were climbing a steep hill. The stone floor was tilted downward, water rushing past their feet and drenching them from above. I don't like this." Logically, Sonny understood that he would be able to escape the drowning temple even if it collapsed and started sinking. Not only was he strong enough to break through the stone walls, he also possessed memories of the House of Night that allowed him to swim like a fish and breathe underwater. However, he still felt tense and claustrophobic. Being caught under an immense mass of stone, with cold water rising higher and higher with each moment, was not the most pleasant of feelings. The ancient temple was shaking and groaning, slowly crumbling around them. I can just send one of the shadows ahead and get to the surface by using Shadow Step. I can take Nephi's with me as well. He glanced at Cassie, who was walking behind them while using the holy staff as a cane. After a short moment of hesitation, Sonny chose to keep all the shadows with him. Soon they reached the great hall where the battle had taken place. Although not much time had passed, it was in far worse shape already. There were actual waterfalls flowing through wide cracks in the distant ceiling, and the dais where Cassie and the Sibyl had clashed was partially submerged underwater. His shadows, whom he had left there to stand guard, were silently watching the rising water. Nightmare come. In the blink of an eye, the black stallion was already at his side. Sonny lingered for a moment, then turned around and grabbed Cassie by her thin waist. "Excuse me." Effortlessly lifting the delicate girl, he placed her on the dark destrier's broad back and gave Nightmare a silent command to reach the surface as soon as possible. "You better hold on tight." Cassie remained motionless for a split second, then suddenly paled and grabbed onto the dreadful steed's mane tightly. She opened her mouth to say something, but a moment later, both of them were gone in a burst of wind. All that could be heard was the sound of adamantine hooves ringing on stone in the distance, and a short shriek. Now then. No matter how fast Sonny and his shadows were, Nightmare was many times faster. And since one of those shadows had been accompanying the black stallion, the three of them, the shadow, and the blind seer, reached the surface much sooner than Sonny would have. By the time he and Nephi's reached the edge of the dais, he could already see the crimson blaze of the twilight sky. Just at that moment, the temple shuddered in another violent quake. Grasping Neph's hand, Sonny pulled her into the dark embrace of shadows. A short instant later, they stepped on the ashen soil of the incinerated garden, bright sunlight briefly blinding both. When Sonny regained his vision, the first thing he saw was Cassie kneeling on the ground in front of Nightmare, her face of an unhealthy greenish color. Taking a few deep breaths, the blind girl raised a trembling hand and pointed an accusing finger at him. Warn me next time, damn it." He grinned. "What's the point? Didn't you already know what I was going to do?" Sonny hurriedly helped her stand up, dodging the tip of the guiding light in the process. "Watch where you point this thing. In any case, there's no time to tarry. We might have escaped the temple, but this whole island is going to fall apart soon. So, hurry up and run." At that point, Nephi's gave him a somber look and said, her voice flat, I'll hurry and run as soon as you let go of my hand." She lingered for a moment and then added evenly, "Or do you want me to carry you?" Sonny froze, then lowered his gaze and realized that he was, indeed, still holding Neff's hand. He blinked a couple of times, then looked up and gave her a smile. "Actually, yeah, I wouldn't mind being carried." With that, Sonny let go and dashed toward the shore of the island ship. Soon, the graceful silhouette of the chain breaker appeared in front of them. He felt much too happy to see the ancient ship and leaped onto its deck without wasting a single second. Just as he did, the drowning island resounded with a deafening crack and split apart. After the island broke apart, it did not take a lot of time for the debris to disappear into the depths of the great river. Sonny, Nephi's, and Cassie stood on the deck of the chain breaker, observing the death throes of this lost part of fallen grace in somber silence. The flowing water seethed and boiled, turning into white foam. The ashen remains of the dark garden were pulled down by the current and swallowed by the depths. In something that felt like too short of a time, though, the surface of the river became calm and clear once again, with not a sign of the massive island vessel left in sight. Sonny sighed softly. The destruction of the artificial island had been too depressing of a scene. It was like a metaphor of the futility of human existence. Countless river people had worked hard to create and maintain it, and even more spent their lives walking upon its ground. But now it was gone, swallowed by the elements in mere minutes, with every trace of it erased from existence. Weave was going to be erased the same way before too long. The cities of the Sibyls had already disappeared, only fallen Grace remained, its fate all but decided. The tomb of Ariel had been home to a thriving civilization once. But now it was nothing but a nightmare. Sonny shook his head, suddenly grim. Would the cities of the waking world be gone one day, too? He had not even known that there was a world outside the endless sprawl of NQSC once. It was hard to imagine that a place so populous and boundless could cease to exist. But then again, the waking world was already a world of ruins. Plenty of thriving cities had been erased from its maps, most of them, even. Entire continents stood desolate, devoid of life, and uninhabited. He even witnessed the extinction of one of these empty continents himself. My mood is all over the place today. What was there to feel sad about? That island had been nothing by the lair of a dangerous abomination. They had come to its shore, killed the abomination, and absconded with precious loot. Cassie even received a pretty stick as a bonus. If anything, he should be feeling utterly delighted. However, Sonny felt mostly tired and sore all over. The battle against the drowned was a short one, but nevertheless very intense. He was battered and bruised, albeit not injured too badly. Gone, gone. Sonny turned and glanced at Crow Crow, who was hopping excitedly on the railing and staring at the empty space where the island had been with a curious expression. The small bird was unburdened by any kind of heavy thoughts. In fact, it did not have any thoughts at all. After all, it was an echo. Now that the island was destroyed, though, that echo had a job to do. As he watched, Cassie approached the black bird and gently took it into her hands. Saying something, the blind girl opened her palms and let the crow fly away. The last thing they heard before Jet's echo disappeared into the distance were indignant caws. Stug, stug. Crow Crow had a simple mission: to inform the inhabitants of fallen Grace about the death of the defiled Sibyl, and then find its way back to the ship. The three masters did not know how long it would take them to rescue Effie and Jet, so they wanted to make sure that the last city would migrate downstream in their absence. Hopefully, by the time they returned, the frail Riverborn would be doing much better. That's done then. Sonny glanced at the wooden staff in Cassie's hands, then at the sails of the chain breaker. He hesitated for a moment, then asked tiredly, "Should we set sail?" After a moment of silence, Nephi shook her head. The night is approaching and all of us are tired. I'd rather just drift with the current until tomorrow. A little rest won't do us any harm." Sunny was happy to hear it. Soon, they were gathered on the mess deck at the stern of the ship. All its compartments had been cleared of debris and repaired by the inhabitants of fallen grace, but the three masters did not visit most of them often, since there was no need to. They mostly spent their time on the upper deck, in their living quarters, or on the mess deck near the galley. There was freshly prepared food on the table, giving off the familiar, delicious smell of Neff's cooking. The covetous coffer stood with its lid open, its teeth gleaming in the warm light of a lantern. Sunny was cradling a cup of tea in his hands, glancing at the several slates laid down in front of him. Honestly, though, he was in no mood to study their mysteries. He just wanted to fill his belly and rest. With a sigh, he pushed the slates away and pulled his plate closer. Swallowing the first mouthful of a fragrant meat porridge, Sunny closed his eyes in delight. Nephi's was preoccupied with eating as well. Cassie, though, seemed to have forgotten about it. She was playing with her new shiny toy instead. The soul shard at the tip of the holy staff was emanating light, its intensity changing from time to time. Sunny stared at her for a bit, then asked, "What are you doing?" The blind girl took a sip of tea absent-mindedly. "Trying to figure out how it works. It's weird. The enchantment doesn't seem to respond to everything. It points to you, Nephi's, Effie, and Kai, but not Jet or that person, Mordred, or Fallen Grace for that matter. It does respond to Windflower, though." Sunny raised an eyebrow, then shifted his perception and gazed beneath the surface of the guiding light. Just as he had expected, there was no weave there. There were no runes, either, just a field of blinding radiance. He had seen something similar when looking at the knives created by Sun God. Within each, there was nothing but a radiant ocean of something, soul essence perhaps, and a soul string of fate, bound onto itself and looping endlessly. Such was the sorcery of gods, entirely unreasonable and void of any kind of logic he could understand. Looping endlessly. His tired mind got caught on these words, but he was distracted just then by Neff's strangely muffled voice. "Found it." Shaking awake from his reverie, Sunny turned and looked at her. Nephi's had a spoon in her mouth, holding one of the slates he had pushed away in both hands. Sunny was rather amused by that sight. "What did you find?" She blinked a couple of times, then awkwardly removed the spoon from her mouth and pointed it at the slate. "Windflower. It's described right here." Soon, all three of them were sitting side by side with the slate resting on the table in front of them. Cassie was tracing her fingers across the stone surface, a focused look on her face. After a while, she slowly nodded. "The coordinates match. It is indeed the right place." The blind girl was much more proficient in navigating the great river, considering how much longer she had spent here than Sunny and Nephi's. She was also the one who had learned the transcript system of the Sibyls and pinned down where Effie and Jet were trapped in the first place. Windflower. Sunny looked at the slate. There were neat columns of symbols engraved on it, as well as an image of a messy circle with frayed edges. It resembled a vortex more than anything, or maybe a cyclone. After studying it for a few moments, he reached out and turned the slate over. Familiar runes covered its reverse side. Without wasting any time, the three masters read them. Pretty soon, Sunny's expression darkened. "The currents of the river are twisted and treacherous near Windflower. Strong gales violently assaulted our ship, as if trying to push it back. Desperate to escape our pursuers, we persisted, entering deeper into the mist. The surrounding waters moved in the wrong direction and with unnatural speed. It was as if we had lost our way and found ourselves near the edge. At some point, we were not struggling against the repelling winds anymore. Instead, overcome by fear, we were battling the raging tide that pulled us deeper and deeper toward the source of the wind." The first part of the text engraved into the reverse side of the slate was an excerpt from a report made by one of the outsiders who had lived in fallen grace. He ventured on a long journey with a small fleet, hopping to find out the fate of a different city, one of the last with which fallen grace still maintained a connection, until the visitors and merchant ship from that city had stopped coming as well. The fleet managed to learn that the city had been destroyed, but on their way back they were attacked by powerful defiled abominations. After a furious battle, only 3 ships managed to escape, pursued by the enemies. They were forced to enter the dangerous waters around Windflower. For a few moments, the mist cleared, allowing me to glimpse the true nature of the tide. We were hopelessly caught inside a whirlpool of titanic proportions, which spun around a bottomless and dark abyss. There was an island hovering above the darkness, with a tall and magnificent tower rising above the misty cliffs. Terror grasped our hearts when we realized that the tide was pulling us into the darkness. Desperate to save our lives, we tried to escape. In the end, only one of the 3 ships managed to fight its way out. The other 2 were swallowed by the vortex, never to be seen again. Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then sighed. So it's a giant whirlpool. Something like that would explain how Effie and Jet had ended up stranded. If the vessel they were traveling on had been pulled into the monstrous vortex and destroyed, they would have no way of getting out again, or rather, no way of getting out again without some great luck. It seemed that they had reached the flying island at the center instead of being crushed in the depths, at least. The fact that Crow was around to deliver messages proved that. Cassie silently shook her head. Not just a giant whirlpool. Don't forget that the great river is a river of time. Any anomaly of its current is not a mundane one. There has to be something strange going on at Windflower as well. Nephi's nodded. But what? Since none of them knew the answer, they turned back to the slate. The rest of the runes on its reverse side contained notes made by the priests and priestesses who had served the Sibyls. The information they had recorded was not too helpful, though, due to the fact that almost no one returned from Windflower alive. That, however, was valuable knowledge in and of itself. The place called Windflower had not always been known by that name. Its previous one, however, was long lost. The magnificent tower the outsider from the fallen grace mentioned had been a stronghold of a powerful seeker once. There had been plenty of them throughout the tomb of Ariel before the foundation of Verge. It was unknown whether the seeker had left the citadel to challenge the estuary, still resided there, or perished a long time ago. All that the Sibyls of fallen grace knew was that, at some point, no one could approach the citadel anymore. There was only one exception that they had heard of. A familiar name. The Serpent King. It was rumored that the Serpent King, Daron of the Twilight Sea, had reached the stronghold and spent some time there, then returned to lead his people in the war against the defilement. Sunny stared at the runes with a thoughtful expression. They had not learned all the secrets of Windflower from the slate, exactly, but they had learned 2 crucial pieces of information. First, that it was possible to brave its danger and come back in one piece. The Serpent King had proved it. Second, he looked at Nephi's, then at Cassie and said, "At least we know the general nature of that place. Fighting against the whirlpool will be hard but doable. The problem, though, is that the island is floating above its chasm. So, if we don't want to be pulled into the depths and killed, the chain breaker has to be able to fly by the time we reach Windflower. Cassie, can you repair it in time?" The blind girl frowned and remained silent for a few long moments. Eventually, she slowly shook her head. "No, there is not enough time, nor is there enough resources to fully restore the enchantments of the ship by then." As Sunny's expression grew somber, she hesitated a bit and added, "However, I think there is something I can do." Cassie stood up and paced for about a minute, thinking about something furiously. Yes, yes, that can work too, I'll need to. Finally, she stopped and spoke again. I can't restore the connection between the sacred tree and the enchantment circle in time, but I can repair the circle itself, I think. Nephi's raised an eyebrow. What would it mean? The blinded girl pointed to the deck. It means that the sorcery that allows the ship to fly will be fully functional. It's just that it would not have a source of power. But we can use our own essence to fuel the enchantment, limited as it is. The chain breaker won't stay in the air for long, nor will it be fast, but it will carry us to that island and back. She scratched her head awkwardly, and then added in a small voice, "And probably." Sunny stared at her for a while, then let out an amused chuckle. The odds, as always, were against them, but when had it been any different? He shrugged. Good enough. Chainbreaker had set sail once again. This time, they had to travel back to the middle area of the great river, where the sky was azure. They also had to travel some distance into the past, not enough to bring them anywhere near Verge, but deeper than any of the three had ever ventured. Sunny spent the first morning lazing in bed and staring at the ceiling. He was thinking about Windflower. The strong winds, the twisted currents, the colossal whirlpool that pulled ships to their doom, and the island flying above the dark abyss, all of it sounded rather nasty. There was the fact that the tower standing on the island had once belonged to a powerful seeker, as well. The Seekers of Truth were people who had entered the tomb of Ariel at the same time as the Sibyls, or even earlier than them, but for an entirely different reason. The Seekers had not been searching for salvation from the devastation of the Doomsday War. Instead, they had braved the Nightmare Desert and found their way into the tomb built by the Demon of Dread due to their thirst for knowledge. Out of curiosity, basically. They had not been a unified group of people either, but rather disparate individuals united only by the similarity of their obsession with knowledge. Bunch of weirdos who would climb into a dreadful tomb simply to satiate their curiosity. Sunny would never. Well, he had entered plenty of dangerous ruins to satiate his desire to explore the dream realm, but that was an entirely different matter. Firstly, he received contribution points for his exploits from time to time. Secondly, none of those ruins had been left behind by terrifying deities. Come to think of it, a couple of them were. Like the Ebony Tower, but he had not ended up there out of curiosity. He had ended up there out of greed. That was a much better reason, so he was not like those weird seekers at all. In any case, Sunny was not excited to visit the stronghold of a powerful seeker. Not even considering the fact their desire to learn Ariel's truth had caused the birth of the defilement, these people did not seem trustworthy at all. A hidden island where a mysterious seeker had lived before disappearing without a trace, surrounded by a nearly impassable barrier of water, wind, and twisted time. Yes, that did not sound ominous at all. Damnation. Of course, they did not really have a choice. Effie and Jet were there, so Sunny, Nephi's, and Cassie couldn't turn back. People fear the unknown the most. If the slate had told them that there was a great nightmare creature living at Windflower, he would have been reluctantly, but calmly coming up with plans to defeat it. But it was the not knowing what waited for them at the center of the whirlpool that made Sunny feel nervous. In the end, tired of being anxious, he decided to distract himself by doing something useful. Climbing out of his bed with a sigh, Sunny finally left his cabin and went to the upper deck. Saint, Fiend, and Nightmare were standing guard at the bow, middle section, and the stern of the ship. Nephi's was holding the steering oar, while Cassie was making preparations to repair the sorceress circle of the ship. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then approached the blind girl. Hey, can I take another look at the guiding light? Looking up, Cassie smiled at him and pointed to the sacred tree. The beautiful staff stood there, propped against its trunk. Thanks, Grabbing the sacred relic of the Sibyls, Sonny went to his usual spot in the shade of the ketch and sat down on the deck. Let's start then. He spent some time weaving the basic enchantments around a transcendent soul shard. His goal was simple: to turn the guiding light into a memory, so that it was easier to use and could be taken back into the waking world. After hours of focused work, however, Sonny was left staring at the wooden staff with a deadpan expression. His eye was twitching slightly. Damn it! It was all a waste. The moment he tried to place the rudimentary weave inside the relic, the lightless strings of shadow essence dissolved in the blinding radiance hidden within the white wood. It was as if they were incinerated from simply touching divine sorcery. All that work for nothing. Uttering a quiet curse, he stood up and put the guiding light back under the sacred tree. Somewhat disheartened, Sonny went a switch with Nephi's at the steering wheel. He guided the ship as she practiced with her sword, dancing with it as the seven suns slowly traveled across the crimson sky. He enjoyed the view a great deal. Later, Sonny spent some time staring at the estuary key, not at all closer to solving its many mysteries. He had a meal with Nephi's and Cassie. He created more essence strings to replace the ones that had been destroyed, and practiced his own swordsmanship, mentally going over the battle with the drowned and thinking of what he could have done better. After all that, Sonny had to admit to himself that he was bored. It was a rather strange and luxurious feeling. Sonny had very rarely received an opportunity to feel bored usually. There had always been something pressing for him to do, learn, or escape. It had been like that in the outskirts, and did not change at all after the awakening. But here in the third nightmare, brief moments of intense and unreasonable danger were separated by long stretches of calm. Of course, he knew that the calm would not last long. It would take them some time to reach Windflower, but they would certainly have to fight for their lives many times on the way. The chain breaker would be attacked by nightmare creatures, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, or the day after that. There would be dangerous anomalies waiting for them under the waves, as well, perhaps some of those described on the stone slates. The Mad Prince could visit him in his dreams at any moment. The appearance of the other plagues weren't out of the question, either. But for now, at least, there seemed to be peace. So, Sonny decided to give himself a day off for once, and enjoy that peace while it lasted. Walking back to the stern of the ship, he summoned a certain piece of furniture and placed it a few meters away from Nephi's. Sitting down on his luxurious chair, he summoned the emerald flute and brought it to his lips. Nephi's looked at him in confusion. "What are you doing?" Trying to raise the dead, but there are no corpses on the ship." Sonny blinked a couple of times. "Who does she take me for? Is it so hard to imagine that I'm just in the mood for music? Kai gave me a few lessons, so I can carry a tune. He might have begged me to perform as a guest during one of Night and Gale concerts, even." She smiled faintly. "I noticed you said might have begged instead of begged." Then her eyes widened slightly. "Wait, Night and Gale concerts. Are they planning a reunion? When? Is it going to be old material, or has Gale written a new album? What about new choreography?" "Who is?" Sonny lowered the flute and stared at her sullenly. Here she goes again, barraging me with questions. "Yes, I don't know, probably not. No clue, no idea, I'm not sure." As the sky slowly grew brighter, the chain breaker sailed toward dawn. The three masters aboard the graceful vessel anxiously awaited the reunion, with two lost members of their cohort. "I wonder." Sonny stared at a delicious-looking golden fruit, torn between the desire to pluck it off the branch and the fear of tasting fruits from mysterious, mystical trees. The last time he had eaten one was not a memory he liked to remember. It probably tastes divine, though. In the end, he sighed and reluctantly looked away from the alluring fruit. It was better not to test fate. Sunny was currently high in the crown of the sacred tree, using it as a crow's nest. The sky above him was of a beautiful azure color, with not a hint of the deep scarlet splendor they had grown accustomed to in fallen grace. It had already been several weeks since they visited the lost library and slayed the defiled Sibyl. The fourth month of their nightmare had ended a few days ago, of course. It had been much longer than that for Cassie and the other members of the cohort. Effie and Jet had spent more than a year stranded in the place called Windflower by now. Sunny couldn't help but worry about them. He was also worried about Rain and the waking world, but there was nothing to be done about that. Climbing to a higher branch, he sighed and looked down. There was usually a black crow following him around, but today the talkative bird was gone. It was somewhere ahead, scouting for prowling abominations and turbulent currents. The crow's presence meant that at least one of the two missing women was still alive. That made Sunny less anxious. In these past few weeks, the chain breaker had traveled far enough into the past to almost reach Windflower. With the help of the guiding light, they did not even have to waste time searching for its precise location. The sacred staff pointed directly to where they needed to go. So, the dreadful whirlpool could appear from beyond the horizon any minute now. Of course, coming this far had not been easy. Sunny, Nephi's, and Cassie had to fight for their lives on many occasions. The graceful vessel had been attacked by swarms of nightmare creatures, grotesque giants from the deep, aerial horrors, and even heralds of the defilement. That last battle had been especially dire, since the defiled were both sentient and vile. And yet, the three of them had slain and slaughtered every enemy that dared to attack the chain breaker for now. The ancient vessel withstood all the attacks without receiving serious damage as well. But the three masters weren't as lucky. Each of them had suffered many grave wounds, some of them almost fatal. If not for Neff's healing powers, they would have never made it so far. They wouldn't have made it without Cassie, either. Sunny had been reminded once more that traveling with an oracle was an invaluable boon. It was because of the blind girl that they had managed to avoid the true perils of the great river, the twisted currents and lethal aberrations where time itself would have killed them in the blink of an eye. They would have perished without Sunny and his shadows as well. The third nightmare was not a place where one could survive without extreme battle power, and currently, he possessed the most of it out of them three. Am I not great? Sunny smiled wryly, then shuddered and furtively looked around, checking to see if the sin of solace was near. The sword wraith would not have missed a chance to cut him with a snide remark in response to such thoughts, but thankfully, the apparition had not deemed it necessary to climb the sacred tree with him. In fact, the sin of solace did not seem to like being too close to the tree from the heart god's grove, for some reason. Sunny used that fact often to get some reprieve. He sighed. The journey to Windflower had not been easy, but at least they had all gotten something out of it. Nephi's was one step closer to becoming a titan, and wore a chainmail shirt over her white tunic. Just like Anank's mantle, the new memory could be worn in conjunction with another armor, albeit due to its unique enchantment rather than its type. In a fashion strange for an awakened, she also carried her sword in a scabbard hung from her belt. The scabbard was another memory, this one capable of enhancing the weapon stored inside of it for a sufficient amount of time. Cassie, meanwhile, was back in her beautiful red peplos dress. Now, however, there were two bracelets on her hands instead of the golden shackles. One was a protective charm memory, the other was supposed to enhance the force of her attacks. She still carried the quiet dancer in a scabbard, this one mundane, not enchanted, but mostly used the guiding light in battle. Although the white staff was not a memory, it did a good job of debilitating her enemies and crushing them into pulp. Sunny was not sure that using a sacred relic to split skulls was appropriate, but he wasn't going to complain. The gods were dead anyway. As for himself, Sunny had earned another 500 shadow fragments on the way to Windflower, bringing him close to 2,500, half of the amount he needed to become a terror. His luck with memories, sadly, had been really bad. He had received a few, but none of them were good enough to add to his soul arsenal. They ended up being fed to his shadows. He had not woven a lot of new memories, either. In fact, Sunny had not done a lot of weaving in these past few weeks, not because there had been no time, but rather because he was currently interested in something else. That something was giving him a lot of trouble, to the point where he often found himself dejected and stupefied. And yet, Sunny persisted with this new interest. During the battle in the flooded temple, he had observed Cassie's artificial echo in action, even though it did not seem that powerful. That was only because their enemies that time had been of both a higher rank and a higher class than the blade mannequin. Sunny would not have wanted to face that thing in battle as an awakened. The most impressive thing about it, though, was the very fact that it was artificial. After interrogating Cassie and Nephi's on the topic, he had found out that the Forgemasters of Clan Valor were capable of creating not only memories, but also echoes. Making one was an extremely long process, though, and one that demanded a lot of precious resources. So, there were actually very few artificial echoes in existence, all of them belonging to the most valued members of the clan. Nevertheless, Sunny couldn't help but wonder if he would be capable of weaving echoes one day, as well. So, he had spent most of his free time studying the blade mannequin. It was not going well for now, but Sunny wasn't disheartened. His attempts to learn the sorcery of names were not bearing any results anyway. Although his horizons were somewhat expanded, being able to actually use this power seemed to be beyond him. If there was one consolation, it was that Cassie was having just as much trouble with it. Being talentless together was less of a bitter pill to swallow. Her mastery of runic sorcery, though, was slowly growing. In fact, there seemed to be a positive loop between the sorcery of names and the sorcery of runes. Both were founded on invoking the true names of things, after all, albeit in a different manner. So, Cassie and Nephi's were able to help each other improve. As a result, the blind girl had indeed managed to restore some of the enchantments permeating the chain breaker. Just as she had told them, the graceful vessel was now once again capable of flight. It just couldn't fly for too long, or too fast. The strain of supplying the ancient ship with essence was dire enough to drain even Neph's reserves in less than a minute. It would have to be enough to carry them to the island at the center of Windflower. Now, all they needed was to actually find it. As Sunny stared at the horizon and tried not to feel too anxious, a swift shadow glided across the deck of the chain breaker. Then, a black bird landed on the branch near him. Crow was back. Strangely, though, the echo seemed less grumpy than it had been recently. Instead, it looked excited. Sunny raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" The crow hopped a couple of times, and then cawed while spreading its wings. Jet. Jumping down from the tree, Sunny landed noiselessly on the deck and dissolved into the shadows. A split second later, he appeared on the bow of the ship, gazing tensely at the horizon. Saint, who was standing nearby with a bow in her hand, spared him an indifferent gaze. Her ruby eyes glowed silently, not betraying any hint of emotion. If only I could be this calm all the time. Sunny remained motionless for a few minutes, then sent mental messages to Cassie and Nephi's. "I think we are drawing close." Indeed, out there, far in the distance, the flowing surface of the great river had grown a little hazy, as if obscured by mist. Considering Crow's excitement, it had to be Windflower. Hurricane winds, destructive currents, and suffocating mist. We'll see how terrible that place is, exactly, very soon. A few moments later, Cassie joined him at the bow. Nephi's remained at the stern, holding the steering oar, but she did respond through the link of the shroud of dusk. "I see." Sunny sighed, then glanced at the blind girl. The soul shard crowning her wooden staff was glowing, its light pointing precisely at the distant haze. There is no doubt, then. Cassie slowly nodded. Yes, we have arrived. The branches of the sacred tree rustled as the chain breaker took a turn. Nephis moved the ship in a wide spiral, positioning it directly upstream of the approaching hazard. By the time she did, Sunny could already see wisps of mist flowing over the surface of the restless water. Time to get to work. Concentrating, he called upon the shadows. The three of them had long discussed how to tackle the titanic whirlpool. There was not much they had to do, really. The first obstacle they were going to face was the repelling wind. So, Sunny lowered the sails to diminish the repelling force. The ship would be carried into the vortex by the current, and once they approached close enough, Nephis would invoke the true name of the wind to lessen its fury. The second obstacle would be raging currents. Sunny's authority over water was not strong enough to calm them, but the chain breaker was sturdy enough to withstand the fury of the elements. It was not going to overturn, either. All they needed was a skilled helmsman and something to guide them through the mist. Cassie was going to accomplish both tasks with a little help from the guiding light. She was quite skilled in controlling the chain breaker, more than any of them were. However, she was not going to be able to guide the flying ship through the last, and most dangerous, of obstacles. Once they were close enough to the island at the center of the vortex but not deep enough into the whirlpool to be swallowed by it, the chain breaker had to lift into the air and reach the shore before its helmsman ran out of essence. Nephis was a terror, and possessed the lineage of Sun God as well, which, among other things, drastically strengthened her soul. Her reserve of essence was the largest among them, so it would be her task to take up the steering oars in those last moments. As the first wisps of gray mist touched the bow of the chain breaker, Sunny suppressed a shiver and looked into the approaching wall of fog with a dark expression. Mist, mist. Nothing good ever happened when there was mist around. Here in the dream realm, it was always a herald of something dreadful approaching. We have prepared for this. Taking a deep breath, he glanced at Cassie and smiled. Let's go find Effie and Jet then. Soon, the chain breaker was swallowed by the mist. The winds had grown stronger, making the folds of Sunny's nebulous mantle flutter. Feeling drops of water fall on his face, he sighed and looked at Cassie. Go. She lingered for a moment, then rushed away to replace Nephis at the steering oar. Sunny was left alone on the bow, looking into the mist with a dark expression on his face. Effie, Jet. Both of them were still alive. They had to be. But how could they? The third nightmare was not easy to survive. And these two, they, of all people, would have found it impossible to cling to life while stranded for more than a year on an isolated island. Jet could only exist by killing living beings to replenish her constantly dwindling essence, after all. Effie was a slave to inhuman hunger. Without access to a great amount of food, she would swiftly wither and die. How many foes to kill could there have been on a hidden island, and how much food? No, don't think about that. The crow echo still existed, which meant at least one of them was still. That crow has always been a bit strange, though, much too animated for a simple echo. Perhaps it has something to do with Wake of Ruin, so who's to say that it can't exist without a master? Sunny threw a dark glance at the Sin of Solace, who grinned in response. Admit it, they are both probably dead already. Ah, how sad. They were slowly starving to death while you were having fun with Nephis on the dark island. You really took it easy back then at the beginning, didn't you? Sunny looked away and gritted his teeth. The sword wraith simply laughed. Come to think of it, your friend Kai is most likely dead, too. Even if the nightmare creatures did not kill him, Mordred surely did. He is probably walking around now, wearing Kai's corpse right as a luxury brand suit. Well, it's for the best. You have always been jealous of that guy anyway. the insecure little wretch that you are. The surface of the great river was growing restless. The waves were already much taller than before, making the bow of the chain breaker sway. Feeling the deck rise and fall beneath him, Sonny closed his eyes for a moment. That's not true. Kai has Anvil's charm, I gave it to him. Mordred can't possess someone wearing that charm. The Sin of Solace stared at him for a few moments, a mocking smile on his lips. The charm, right, it protected Wealth really well, huh? Snarling, Sonny turned around and prepared to rebuke the apparition, but at that moment, a calm voice resounded from behind them. Are you talking to your sword again? He flinched and looked back. Neff's slender figure slowly revealed itself from the mist, two pristine white sparks burning in her cold gray eyes. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded silently. Stopping once she reached him, Nephis looked into the mist and said, her voice even. I believe that they are all alive too. A bitter smile appeared on Sonny's lips. Sure, but it seems like wishful thinking, doesn't it? People were not immortal. He had lost enough comrades to know how ruthless this world they lived in was, so wasn't it a bit naive to stubbornly cling to hope after Antarctica? Nephis shook her head. On the contrary, I think there is a valid and logical reason to believe that all members of the cohort are not dead yet. She put her hand on the hilt of her sword and said calmly, the 6 plagues exist. They are most likely the future versions of the 6 of you, therefore, none of you is likely to be dead in the present. Otherwise, their existence can't be explained. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then nodded. That is strangely reassuring in a morbid kind of way. You can't die yet because you're destined to become a defiled monster, huh? What a paradox. Neff's logic assumed that the future was predetermined. If so, there was no way that Effie and Jet were gone. However, that also meant that there was no way for the 6 of them to avoid killing her and becoming the 6 plagues, which made this whole endeavor meaningless. If the future was not predetermined, though, then the cohort could potentially write a different ending for themselves and the nightmare. Yet it also meant that there was no reason to believe that the rest of the members were still alive. Sonny knew that fate could hardly be changed, but he also knew that it did not govern every small occurrence and event. The details of what happened and how it did could be altered. It was just that the end result almost always remained the same. Sooner or later, all deviations were proven meaningless, failing to change the grand design of the future. It was easier to change fate inside of a nightmare, as well, due to its fragmented and isolated nature. Plus, the great river was a strange place. Who was to say that their fate wasn't to become the 6 plagues, only for their younger selves to slay them and conquer the nightmare unscathed? Ah, my head hurts. He rubbed his face. All this stuff, the paradoxical nature of the great river, the unreliable future, the greater tapestry of fate, were too strange and irrational for a human mind to comprehend. The best they could do was just try to do their best at the moment and strive to reach the desired outcome, ignoring the confusing reality of the tomb of Ariel as much as possible. The winds were growing stronger. The branches of the sacred tree swayed, rustling worriedly. The swaying of the deck grew more pronounced. A thick mist enveloped everything in sight. Hey, Sonny. He looked at Nephis, surprised by her strangely candid tone, and raised an eyebrow. Knowing her, some ridiculous statement was about to follow. He was not going to be fooled into listening to her apologize for his projector twice. But Nephis was perfectly earnest. There is nothing wrong with a bit of wishful thinking. We will find them both alive. I'm sure of it. At that moment, the wind slammed into them like a ram, making both sway. Raising a hand, Sonny caught Nephis and helped her steady herself. At the same time, he used the feather of truth trait of the shell to increase his weight and ground himself more solidly on the deck. The two of them remained silent for a few moments, looking into each other's eyes. Then Sunny smiled. "All right, Neff, I'll believe you this time." Soon, they were deep into the barrier surrounding Windflower. There was nothing but blinding mist, hurricane winds, and violent currents in this dreadful and deadly place. Sunny could easily imagine countless ships being drowned by the inconceivable whirlpool. Powerful nightmare creatures as well. No wonder almost no one returned after being swallowed by the mist. And yet, the fury of the wind was terrible, but not terrible enough to sway them. Nephi's had invoked the true name of the wind, lessening the pressure on the graceful ship. The chain breaker stubbornly cut through the mist, refusing to be pushed back. The violence of the raging currents was daunting, but not daunting enough to stop them. Guided by Cassie's steady hand, the chain breaker broke through the fortress wall of the towering waves, never straying off course. By then, the natural flow of the great river was replaced entirely by a terrifying tide that was pulling them deeper and deeper into the mist. The deck beneath their feet was tilted downward, indicating that they were sliding into the giant, insatiable maw of the colossal whirlpool. Instead of allowing the ship to be carried by the current, Cassie kept its bow pointed perpendicular to the rush of seething water, cutting as short a line to the center of the vortex as possible. It took a lot of effort to keep the chain breaker under control, but she managed it splendidly. It was still too early to take to the sky. Sunny and Nephi's had long joined Cassie at the stern. Fiend and Crow Crow were hiding under the sacred tree, both soaked in water and miserable, while Nightmare had dissolved into shadows and hid in their dark embrace. Only Saint remained on the bow of the ship, standing there like an immovable onyx statue. The plume of her helmet danced in the wind. It was easy to get lost in the mist, but the radiance of the guiding light was showing them the way. Straining against the howling wind, Sunny yelled, "How much longer?" His shout was swallowed by the mist. At almost the same time, though, the veil of fog was torn apart for a few brief moments. When Sunny saw the scale and magnitude of the vortex they were trying to brave, his face turned ashen. The whirlpool was indeed colossal, stretching as far as the eye could see. The raging tide moved in a vast circle, forming a revolving crater. They were currently sliding recklessly down its slope. Far away and below them, a harrowing darkness devoured the world. The depths of the great river lay naked and revealed, but his human eyes were not capable of discerning what dwelled below. Or maybe there was nothing there at all, just an endless, bottomless abyss. However, there was an island hovering in the air above the darkness. Flowing mist shrouded its dark cliffs, and a magnificent tower rose from somewhere far inland, obscured by fog. The sight of the island was both austere and sinister, like a stark omen of ill fate. "Hurry!" Cassie let go of the steering oar and stepped out of the circle, allowing Nephi's to take her place. Neph was there a split second later. She took both steering oars and looked ahead, white flames dancing in her eyes. Then her radiant essence poured into the runic circle, flooding the enchantments of the ancient vessel with incinerating power. Sunny yelped and grabbed a railing. In the next moment the chain breaker shook slightly and soared into the air. It's working. The graceful vessel was not flying nearly as fast as it had been able to before, and its flight was not nearly as smooth. But they were indeed in the air, moving toward the distant island. When Cassie and the firekeepers had restored the ancient flying ship to a shadow of its former glory, it had already been an incredible feat. But that had taken them almost a year, with dozens of people lending a hand. The fact that the blind girl now managed to achieve so much alone, and in the span of a few weeks, was truly remarkable. And it gave them the chance to accomplish their goal. Of course, it was still unclear if the chain breaker would be able to maintain its flight for long enough. Would they reach Windflower Island? Or would they plummet into the darkness and be crushed by the dreadful vortex? Only one way to find out. Sonny turned his head and looked at Nephi's, who was holding the steering oars, her eyes shining with a brilliant white radiance. He could sense a flood of essence pouring out of her soul like a shining torrent. That essence was absorbed by the runic circle and flowed through the enchanted lines stretching throughout the ship, feeding its enchantments with power. There was no hint of doubt on Neff's face, and so he decided to throw away his doubts as well. A few moments later, the shroud of mist obscured everything once again. Only the glow of the guiding light was there to show them the way. The chain breaker sailed through the blinding fog, with only the rustle of countless leaves proving that the sacred tree still existed somewhere out there, near them, hidden from sight. Come on, come on. They didn't have to struggle against the current anymore, but the hurricane winds were still raging. They slammed into the hull of the ship with vicious force, trying to push it back. Because of it, the speed of the chain breaker fell even more. Damn it! Sonny had been counting the seconds. It had already been a full minute since the moment Nephi stepped into the circle, more than they had been able to fly in the tentative test the day before. The radiance of her eyes was dimming. And yet, suddenly, Nephi's moved and smoothly raised one of the oars. At the same time, the chain breaker began to descend. Gradually, the fury of the winds was extinguished. The mist was still obscuring the world. But then the ancient vessel finally fell onto soft, white sand. There was a violent crash, but the hull of the chain breaker withstood the impact. The runic circle fell dormant once again, and the enchantments lost all power. There was nothing but mist around them, and silence. They had reached Wind Flower. Sonny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened and looked around. The chain breaker was laying on white sand, tilted awkwardly. It had shattered the side of a black cliff and was now leaning on it, which prevented the ship from turning over. They had gotten lucky despite the blind landing. The fog was still there, obscuring the world, but it had become less thick. Sonny could make out the figure of Saint standing still on the bow of the beached vessel, as well as more cliffs rising high above them. It seemed that Nephi's had guided the chain breaker to a small strip of sand at the very edge of the island. Changing Star herself was leaning heavily on the steering oars. Her face was paler than usual, and the white flames were gone from her eyes. She had completely exhausted her essence to carry the ship across the dark abyss. Sonny grimaced. It was very unfortunate to have one of them utterly drained of essence right now. No one knew what dangers were waiting for them on the misty shore. These first minutes could very well prove to be of vital importance. Not that there had been a choice. I'm fine. Noticing his gaze, Nephi's forced out a faint smile and put a hand on the hilt of her sword. I can still put up a fight. Sonny nodded, having no doubt in her ability to do just that, despite this weakened state. She was a seasoned slayer. Nevertheless, they had to be careful not to allow themselves to be wounded. It would be quite a while before Nephi's could heal them again. Cassie used the guiding light to pick herself off the deck and shivered slightly as the mist caressed her skin. Her expression was troubled. Noticing it, Sonny tensed as well. What is it? The blind girl had an intuition that was far superior to even his. It had saved their lives numerous times, so seeing her this nervous was not a good sight. She lingered for a while, then shook her head with a frown. I'm not sure, I just have a very ominous feeling. This place, Wind Flower, every part of me is screaming that we are in danger. Come to think of it, he felt it too. An invisible, dark pressure emanating from all around them. All his instincts were telling him one thing, that there were dreadful predators somewhere close, much more dreadful than even he himself was. Sonny scowled. Aren't we always in danger? Despite saying those words nonchalantly, he summoned the sin of solace and called upon his shadows. Saint, Fiend, and Nightmare got closer, surrounding the three masters in a defensive formation. Nephi's had walked to the edge of the deck and was now peering into the fog, her expression impassive. After a few moments of silence, she turned to Cassie and said, "Do it." They had discussed what to do a long time ago. The first thing, unless they were attacked immediately after landing, was to make use of the guiding light. None of them really understood how the divine relic worked, but they had established that it could point them in the direction of not only Windflower, but also Effie, or, at least, its tip lit up when the person holding the staff thought about her. However, it did not react the same way to Jet. That fact had been a source of many dark thoughts for Sunny. As Crow landed on his shoulder, Cassie gripped the wooden staff tighter. Then she lingered for a moment. "Huh, that's strange." Sunny glanced at the guiding light, which was still pointing to somewhere deep in the mist, and raised an eyebrow. "What? It seems to be working just fine." The blind girl shook her head. "No, nothing. It's just that I have not asked it to find Effie yet. The light should still be pointing to Windflower. I thought it would disappear once we reached it." She concentrated for a moment, and then the radiance of the enchanted crystal changed subtly. It was still pointing deeper inland, but at a different angle. Sunny secretly let out a sigh of relief. He did not know if the guiding light truly pointed to Effie, her lifeless body, or something else entirely. And yet, seeing it shine was a relief. That gluttonous woman, she'd better be alive, or else I'll be very cross with her. He scowled, then took a step forward. "Let's go, then." Jumping over the railing, he plummeted down and landed on the sand. A moment later, Nephi's was by his side. Saint and Fiend landed with a bit more noise than the two of them, and lastly, Nightmare leaped from the deck of the ship, carrying Cassie on his back. The six of them remained motionless for a few moments, listening to the silence of Windflower. There were no sounds around them, no movement. Only the soft white sand and the black cliffs faintly visible in the fog. A piece of rock fell from the shattered crag and rolled down, the noise both dampened and made louder by the mist. It echoes, making them tense. Sunny took a deep breath. His vision was obstructed by the fog, and strangely enough, so was his shadow sense. It was not entirely gone, but the range was limited to about as far as he could see. Beyond that, the shadows felt vague and unreliable. He didn't like being that vulnerable at all. At least the fog itself did not feel dangerous. It was a nuisance, sure, but far from being as senselessly terrifying as the mists of the hollow mountains. Curse it all. Frowning, Sunny took a step forward. As he did, a human figure suddenly revealed itself from the murky veil of the fog. He flinched and tensed, ready to attack, but then froze. Black eyes, porcelain skin, the sin of solace was looking at him mockingly. "What did I scare you? Ah, how tiresome." It was the damned apparition. Sunny gritted his teeth and walked past the sword wraith, heading straight for the cliffs. At the same time, he sent 3 of his 5 shadows in different directions, ordering them to cautiously scout ahead. Slow and steady, slow and steady. Effie and Jet had already been on this island for more than a year. They would have to wait for a few hours, or even days more. If Sunny, Nephi's, and Cassie were too hasty and proceeded recklessly, they could very well die before finding the lost members of the cohort. He was not going to underestimate the perils of Windflower. But he was going to find his friends, no matter what. There can't be any mistakes. As Sunny's shadows climbed the cliffs, he and his companions cautiously advanced up the beach. Even the crow, who had been anxious and impatient to find its master all this time, seemed wary and subdued. The black bird was sitting on Sunny's shoulder, its feathers raised, and kept silent. The mist swirled silently around them. Saint and Fiend were in the rear, both ready to defend against an unexpected attack at any moment. Sunny and Nephi's were in the middle. Cassie rode Nightmare at the front of the group, her back straight. The radiance of the guiding light that she held up illuminated the way. At some point, the shadow steed suddenly stopped. Sonny gripped the hilt of the Sin of Solace tighter and said in a low voice, "What is it?" Cassie remained motionless for a moment, then pointed the sacred staff down at the ground. When Sonny and Nephi's approached, they immediately understood why. Out there in the white sand, hidden in the mist, was a line of lonesome footprints. Sonny kneeled to study them, a frown appearing on his face. Those were left by a human. Neff's voice echoed in the fog. He nodded slightly. Indeed, the shallow prints left in the sand belonged to a human. From the look of it, someone had walked across the beach barefoot. It was hard to tell the gender of the person just from these traces, but they could not have been of a very large stature. Both the size and the depths of the footprints proved otherwise. The traces also looked fresh. They could not have been left more than a few hours ago. Sonny felt a cold chill creeping up his spine. Who was taking barefoot walks in this harrowing place? There was another strange detail about the footprints. Contrary to what Sonny would have expected, the line of them came from the direction of the cliffs and disappeared in the mist, heading toward the edge of the island. And yet they had not met or heard anyone on their way here. He hesitated for a few moments, then looked at Nephi's and said, "Wait here." Leaving one shadow behind to step out of it should the need arise, Sonny stood up and followed the footprints into the fog. Soon, his companions disappeared from view, and he was left alone in the swirling mist. I don't like it." If not for the fact that he could still see them through the shadow, Sonny would have been tempted to turn back. A few minutes later, he reached the end of the beach. The edge of the island opened into an abyssal chasm, the view of the colossal whirlpool and the darkness hiding below obscured by the fog. Sonny felt something he had not felt for a long time, a sense of vertigo. Come now, really, I can turn into a bird. Is it really necessary to be afraid of heights? He sighed and shook his head. The footprints led to the very end of the island. There, the lonesome line of them disappeared, as if the person who had left it behind leaped off the edge into the misty abyss. Sonny was suddenly overcome by strange melancholy. "Why don't you try jumping too?" He slowly looked at the Sin of Solace, who was standing at the very edge, looking into the fog with a distant expression. "No thanks." The sword wraith smiled. "Why not? You said it yourself, you can turn into a bird. Hey, maybe this person knew how to fly too." Sonny sighed and nodded. "Right, I should watch the sky well, watch the fog above. Aerial attacks are some of the most nasty." As he was walking back to Nephi's and Cassie, Sonny was thinking about the footprints in the sand. Who had left them behind? Had that person really jumped off the edge? If so, why? Were they swallowed by the dark abyss? It seemed like such a shame. If the chain breaker arrived at Windflower a few hours earlier, they could have met this person. How bitter would it be to arrive at an island from where no one could return on the same day that its inhabitant had decided to take their own life? Maybe they had not, though. Maybe they really had soared into the sky and escaped this forlorn place. He could not be sure. One thing he was sure about, though, was that the footprints did not belong to Effie or Jet. Effie was too tall to have left them behind, while Jet would have never chosen to end her life after everything she had done to preserve it. She had literally climbed out of a grave and endured being dead, all to continue living. Would a person like that ever give up? Sonny had no doubt that she would not. By the time he reunited with Nephi's and Cassie, his shadows had already scaled the cliffs. In front of them was a dark forest of tall pine trees, mist swirling between the ancient trunks. One shadow cautiously glided to the left, another to the right, while the last one continued to advance forward in the direction of the distant tower. The island was large, much larger than the islands of the Chained Isles were, so exploring it was going to take a lot of time, especially because Sonny wanted to be careful and not expose his shadows to any danger. It's going to take days, weeks maybe, damn it. There was no sign of Effie and Jet. The footprints lead to the edge of the island. I didn't find anything else, so let's trace them in the other direction. Cassie raised the guiding light again, and they moved along the line of footprints toward the cliffs. They advanced slowly and cautiously, never letting their guard down. Although nothing had attacked them yet, the quiet feeling of danger was growing more dire and terrifying with each step. Eventually, they arrived in front of a vertical wall of black rock. The footprints disappeared once again, this time in front of narrow stairs cut into the cliffside. The steps led all the way to the forest, by the looks of it. Sonny and Nephi's glanced at each other. The stone stairs were too narrow to maintain their formation. If something attacked them while they were ascending the steps, they would have to fight in a very awkward position. Fiend, take the lead. The steel ogre was the most resilient out of them, so he was going to serve as the shield of the cohort. The shadow did not seem too concerned with his task. Either, with dark flames burning in his eyes, he moved to the front of the formation and stepped onto the first step. As they climbed the stairs, Sonny walked behind Nephi's. At some point, he noticed that she was paying a lot of attention to the stone steps disappearing beneath their feet. "What are you thinking about?" She hesitated for a few moments, then said evenly, "These are man-made." Sonny nodded. After a short pause, Neph added, "Which means that they must have been cut from stone by the seeker who lived on this island." It was a logical conclusion. Sonny glanced at the stone steps, thinking about how ancient they were. Then he scowled. "You noticed it too?" Sonny lingered for a moment, then answered Neph's question with another nod. These stairs were strange. They were supposed to be ancient, and yet there was no sign of corrosion on them. The steps were not weathered and ground down by the endless assault of the elements. Instead, they were perfectly preserved and sharp, as if someone had cut them just yesterday. Is this rock indestructible, or are there strange things happening to time on this island? Sonny wanted to examine this question further, but at that moment, he froze. Out there far ahead, the shadow he had sent toward the tower heard a sound. Although it was muffled by the mist, Sonny would never fail to recognize it. It was the sound of steel clashing against steel, followed by a scream of pain. At the same moment, the crow that had been sitting silently on his shoulder suddenly jumped into the air and shot forward, instantly disappearing into the fog. Sonny's eyes widened. Jet, Sonny had recognized the voice. There was no doubt that the person screaming in pain in the depths of the forest was Jet. She was so close. And in danger. He hesitated for a moment. Bad. His intuition was telling him that something absolutely deadly waited for him in the mist. Blindly rushing forward could very well invite disaster. And more than that, the scream itself was suspicious. Was Soul Reaper Jet someone to scream from pain? No, she wasn't. Sonny had seen her maintain composure while impaled on a jagged piece of alloy. Something could have been mimicking her voice to lure them into a trap. He had met creatures that lived in the mist and mimicked human voices before, after all. The memory alone was enough to make him shudder. And yet, what if it really was her? If there was something on the island that had made Jet shriek in agony, then the danger she faced was truly dire. There was no time to hesitate at all. "Sonny." He flinched, then looked at Nephi somberly. Despite Sonny's shaken state, he knew that he had already made the decision. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Someone is fighting in the forest, about 4 kilometers from the top of the stairs. It should be Jet. I'm going." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded calmly and unsheathed her sword. "We'll be right behind you, then." As Cassie commanded the guiding light to point its radiance to where Sonny was instead of Effie, he dove into the shadows. "I'm doing something very dangerous." Throughout the years, Sonny had often been forced to take unacceptable risks, but that was only because his back had been against the wall and the circumstances had not allowed him to make a different choice. If possible, he preferred to win every battle before it even started, or at least get as close to ensuring the favorable result as possible. Observing his enemy, making careful preparations, dictating the ebb and flow of the battle, that was where he felt the most comfortable and where his aspect truly shined. Right now, Sonny had no idea what enemy he was going to face, was rushing into battle without having made any preparations, and did not hold any initiative at all. Much worse, he was doing all these things here, in the depths of the third nightmare, surrounded by the mists of wind flower. It was hard to imagine a place more perilous than that. It's just one of those situations where I only have bad choices. It's going to be all right, though. I've survived all the previous gambles, so I'll pull through this time as well. Stepping out of the shadow that had heard Jet's voice, Sonny gave it an order to wrap itself around him and dashed into the mist with as much speed as he could muster. At the same time, he called the other two scouting shadows back. It was going to take a bit of time for them to return, but still, he preferred to plan ahead. Tearing through the fog, Sonny swiftly traversed the remaining distance to the place where the scream had come from. Soon, he broke free of the pine trees and entered a wide clearing. The ever-present fog was a bit thinner here, allowing him to see a dozen meters or so in all directions. Sonny dug his heels into the soft moss and slid for a few meters before coming to a halt. The sin of solace was already raised, ready to strike. But there was no movement around him. Sonny froze for a split second, scanning the misty clearing. He didn't see or sense any enemies, at least not in the small area he could perceive. What he did sense, however, was the familiar smell of blood. There, out there in front of him, hidden by fog, a figure was slumped on the ground. Dashing forward, Sonny approached the figure and staggered. "See, curse it." It was indeed Jet, however she was. Her black leather armor seemed unbroken, and yet Soul Reaper's beautiful face was contorted in a grimace of pure agony. A moment later, Sonny noticed a strange incongruity about her. Looking closer, he understood that Jet's right arm was laying a bit too far from her body. It had been viciously severed near the shoulder. The hand was still clutched into a fist, but the glaive gripped in it was broken, already dissipating into a stream of white sparks. The moss was greedily absorbing dark, steaming blood. His chest suddenly felt constricted. Neff has not recovered her essence yet. As he thought that, Jet suddenly opened her eyes. They had always been icy and blue, but now the blue color had become so intense that it almost seemed as if it was glowing in the dim twilight of the misty island. There was a hint of recognition in her dazed gaze. Her lips moved, but Sonny failed to discern the barely audible whisper. "Hold on, Jet, hold on." Kneeling in front of her, he lowered his head and listened. Jet's voice was weak and hoarse. "Sonny B, behind you, fog." His eyes widened. A split second later, he was already moving. Jumping to his feet, Sonny spun and brandished the sin of solace. He only had enough time to notice a vague shape in the swirling mist, elusive and ethereal, as if made out of the fog itself. The world around him was suddenly terribly cold, the breath escaping from his mouth as steam. "Got you." The jade blade of the cursed giant sliced through the ethereal figure without meeting any resistance. Sonny was used to the feeling of the flesh of his enemies parting before the white jade like water, so he wasn't too surprised. However, something was wrong. Cursing, he jumped back, narrowly avoiding being grasped by the misty apparition. Cold sweat appeared on his face. Sonny had no reason to believe so, but he felt as if he had just avoided certain death. What the? His thoughts were moving quickly. The sin of solace had passed through the enemy, but the enemy easily shrugged off the attack. How could it be? Elusive, ethereal, seemingly woven out of fog, an incorporeal enemy. This was not the first time he had faced murderous wraiths and ghost-like abominations. Grimacing, Sonny let go of the hilt of his cursed sword and allowed it to fall to the ground. Luckily, he had a weapon perfectly capable of destroying intangible foes. The ghost blade, enchantment of the cruel sight, allowed it to do just that. Now, he just had to survive a few seconds until the somber spear manifested itself. The problem was that he could not see the mist wraith anymore. After attacking once, it dissolved into the swirling fog, becoming utterly invisible. The next strike could come at any moment from any direction. The gloomy and happy shadows were already approaching from two different directions. Very soon, they would reach the clearing and augment his speed even more. This battle was not going to be as hard then. Now I just need to. Sonny. Jet's hoarse voice resounded from below, but he didn't allow himself to look down. All his focus was concentrated on the swirling mist, watching for the signs of the next attack. Be careful, she's. Finally, the cruel sight appeared in his hand, instantly igniting with the radiance of divine flame. The fog around the silver blade seethed, evaporating. At almost the same time, the happy shadow reached the clearing and burst from the line of trees, flying toward him with incredible speed. The gloomy shadow was not far behind. The mist moved. Hug. Strangely enough, the wraith was not lunging at him. Instead, it was at the edge of the clearing, moving to intercept. No. Suddenly, harrowing pain tore through Sonny's mind and body. Letting out a bestial wail, he fell to one knee, clutching at his chest. Argasia. It was an agony unlike anything he had ever experienced. As Sonny watched with disbelieving eyes, his vision blurry, the happy shadow was out there in front of him, impaled on a ghostly blade. Once lively and joyful, it was now empty and hollow. Dead. The spell whispered solemnly into his ear. Your shadow has been destroyed. Your shadow core has been destroyed. Gloomy. Sonny was paralyzed by pain, but he tried to move nevertheless. However, it was too late. The mist wraith was suddenly on the opposite side of the clearing, and he was brought to the ground by another wave of unimaginable, killing torment. Your shadow has. Your core destroyed. His soul was severely damaged. Two of his shadow cores had shattered, and his soul was falling apart. No, no, no. Letting out a tortured howl, Sonny struggled to stand up, but all he managed was to rise to one knee. It was then that he felt a cold presence looming above him. Looking up, he saw it. Two icy blue eyes, looking down at him with inhuman coldness. Laying on the ground, Jet whispered in a voice that was like a dying flame. Me. Then a ghostly blade pierced Sonny's chest. It passed through the dark fabric of Anank's mantle and the black silk of the Shroud of Dusk as if they were no obstacles at all. Neither marble shell nor bone weave offered it any resistance, either. The blade did not cut Sonny's skin, nor did it sever his flesh. Instead, it struck directly at his lightless soul. Already damaged, it crumbled from that single strike. That was how Sonny had been slain by undying slaughter of the 6 plagues. For the first time, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.